Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ann Siren. I'm the interim comprehensive planning manager for the town. Joining me today in the room is Renee Phillips, who's running our webinar for us. We also have Terry Lewis, Teresa Haley, and Nicole Dixon, and Jimmy Lopko. So a great team on staff to hopefully have a productive conversation with you. Thank you for joining us. In the webinar today on our panel are Councilman David Ames, Alex Brown, Tom Lennox, and I also want to note that two of our consultants, Tyson Smith and Kelly Cousineau with White & Smith, are also joining us in the panel. What I'd like to do today is give you a brief presentation on the short-term rental initiative before opening the floor to questions and answers. And just a note, in the app, there are two options to give questions and answers. One is live, and if you select the raise hand button, we'll know that you want to speak during the webinar and ask your question or make your comment, or you can use the Q&A function. You can type out your question and someone on staff will answer your question. Just as a note, this meeting will end at 5 o'clock and we'll try to stay to that time frame, but there are future meetings coming up and I'll mention the dates and times of those, and those are also posted on the town's website. Two of the meetings are specifically targeted to groups, but everyone's welcome to attend. So that's Monday, January 31st for short-term rental owners from 10 to 12. February 1st, Tuesday, from 3 to 4:30 for residential property rental companies. And Thursday, February 3rd, from 2:30 to 4:30, we'll have another open house. So there's plenty of opportunities to participate. All right. And at the end of this webinar, there will be a poll. We want to get your feedback on this format and any improvements we can make. So we'll get started with the presentation and then open up the floor to Q&A. Okay. So for today's presentation, I'll give an introduction to the project and we'll review short-term rental trends, the project purpose statement and timeline, the town's plan for public participation. We'll review the stakeholder list and the resources available on the town's website. We'll also discuss the open town hall survey and review the feedback that we've received so far. I'll also cover next steps and how to stay involved in the project. So the town is considering a predictable and balanced approach to manage the impacts of short-term rentals. This is being directed by the Public Planning Committee, which is a standing committee of Town Council. The committee meets every month on the fourth Thursday of the month at 10 o'clock. Those meetings right now are virtual, and you can view them on the town's Facebook public meetings page. You don't need a Facebook account to view the meetings. You can just click on the link. Okay. At the start of this project, the committee identified several issues for examination and discussion related to short-term rentals, and I'll review those. The number of short-term rentals on the island, which we'll see has increased in recent years. The impacts of short-term rentals on neighborhoods, the environment, and the island's infrastructure. The imbalance between residential and commercial districts, as traditionally residential neighborhoods have converted into a more commercial nature. The impacts on workforce housing. And the lack of occupancy limits for single-family homes that are being used as short-term rentals. Lack of requirements for additional parking for single-family homes being used as short-term rentals. And nuisance issues such as noise, parking, and improper trash disposal. And so let's take a look at short-term rental trends. Now we have data from 3 companies from September 2019 to September 2021. And these data points are variable, and I'll go into that in a minute. But you can see the trend line here increasing over the past 2 years between the 3 lines. So the committee used this information to craft a project purpose statement. And that's as a resort area, Hilton Head Island has numerous short-term rental units. But the lack of a short-term rental ordinance has led to an imbalance between residential and resort districts and the elimination of some long-term single-family neighborhoods. The town proposes to craft a short-term rental ordinance to develop a fair, predictable, and balanced approach to manage short-term rental impacts on our neighborhoods, economy, housing stock, public facilities, and the quality of life of our residents, and the experience of our visitors. In summary, short-term rentals are an important part of the island's economy, and I want to emphasize that. Obviously, this is aimed at short-term rental owners, and we would like you to understand how important that short-term rentals are, and we appreciate that fact. This is a resort economy. It is based largely on our visitor experience, and short-term rentals are a vital part of that. So I want to emphasize that point. So though most short-term rentals are well managed, there are issues that need to be discussed or addressed. Specifically, we need to discuss ways to address nuisance issues, such as noise, trash disposal, and parking. We also need to discuss larger issues such as occupancy and impacts on residential neighborhoods. In starting this project, staff researched many other resort communities' ordinances related to short-term rentals. So we're not the only resort community to experience these issues, and there's a lot of information out there to digest and consider. We contracted White & Smith, a code writing consultant team based in Charleston, to assist in drafting standards for short-term rentals. And we developed an initial project timeline and a plan for public participation. We'll take a look at those. You can see here in the project timeline, we're at the end of phase 1 of the project, which is public and stakeholder outreach and data development and research. So obviously this meeting is part of our public outreach. We identified a list of stakeholders, which I'll review, that we reached out to and tried to assess and understand their concerns about short-term rentals. There are a lot of different perspectives to consider, and we wanted to make sure we were getting as much feedback as possible from as many perspectives as possible. As I said, we identified and engaged stakeholders in this process. That includes the public. Folks who live on the island maybe don't have a direct, maybe don't live next to a short-term rental or own or manage one, but still live in the community and want to participate. We offered these virtual meetings and open houses as a way for folks to engage with us. We also captured public input with an online survey, which is still open. And I would encourage you, if you haven't already taken it, please take the survey and share it with your neighbors and friends. Staff is providing updates to the Public Planning Committee during their monthly meetings. Again, that's the fourth Thursday of each month at 10 a.m. And the next meeting is January 27th. The town short-term rental initiative page gives a lot of information that includes previous presentations, the project timeline and purpose statement that we just looked at, a way to submit questions, the link to sign up for the survey, and to sign up for project updates. And we're trying to have a broad communication strategy. We've been using email, social media, and interviews to get the word out. Our stakeholder list includes short-term rental owners, such as many of you, the managers and boards and community in large resort communities. So Sea Pines, Shipyard, and Palmetto Dunes of the large gated communities on the island do allow short-term rentals, and the rest, like Indigo Run, don't. We've reached out to neighborhood POAs and HOAs, realtors, the Chamber of Commerce, utility companies, the Gullah community, property management and property rental companies, residents focusing on the South End, and then Mid and North Island, the Home Builders Association, and the Sheriff's Office. And you can see here, this is just a screen grab of our landing page of the short-term rental initiative. You can see here, take our online survey, there's that button. And I just also want to bring your attention to the sign up for project updates button, so you can be aware of upcoming events for the project, including upcoming meetings. As I mentioned, the open town hall survey is open until January 31st, and I encourage everyone to participate in that. And also the feedback is open to the public. So if you're interested in seeing what other folks have to say without their name being attached to it, you can review what folks have to say and really get a sense of what the concerns are. I'd like to review a summary of the feedback we've received so far. I'm interested in seeing if any of this resonates with you and if anything is missing. We'll talk about general feedback first and then feedback we've received specifically from short-term rental owners. So in terms of general themes, there's a concern that the island's brand may be threatened by short-term rentals to some extent. So we're a unique resort community and we have a unique position in the market. We don't want to lose that. Some folks have expressed concern that an increased number of short-term rentals and some of the negative externalities related to that may tarnish the brand. Other folks don't have that opinion. We've heard concerns about data. We are capturing data from pre-pandemic and today to understand those trends. Obviously, there is an exceptional increase in the number of short-term rentals in a short amount of time, which we don't necessarily expect to continue in the future. But we need to get that data to dial down into those numbers to better understand the extent of short-term rentals on the island. In terms of enforcement, we've heard from many people that they would like a quick response to resolve issues that come up and a clear path to do that. We've heard from folks with concerns about environmental impacts of short-term rentals. Folks have said, people are building large buildings on small lots and they're cutting down trees to do it. We've heard concerns about gated and private communities. Will those regulations apply to me if the town puts them in place? Because I live in a gated community, we have our own regulations. We've had questions and thoughts from people about the town's legal authority to enforce short-term rentals and current state legislation that would be a prohibition on municipalities prohibiting short-term rentals, so a ban on bans, so to speak. And we're keeping our eye on that. Other themes that we've heard are about location. Folks say short-term rentals in this area are not a problem, but they may be a problem over here. So maybe if you put in an ordinance, it should apply to specific areas and not others. That relates somewhat to the next point about neighborhood zoning and land use. Some folks are saying my residential neighborhood is transitioning in a way that I don't like, or some folks say that's always been a resort area. If you live in there, you should know that that's going to be a resort area. So I think there are some geographic concerns that we need to take into account. We've heard concerns and complaints from people about noise, daytime and nighttime violations of noise, the noise ordinance. We've heard concerns about the number of short-term rentals overall and whether the island has the capacity for this many short-term rentals. We've heard concerns about occupancy, including occupancy limits and a minimum number of nights. That's been discussed several times. We've heard concerns about parking, people complaining about parking on lawns and vehicles encroaching into the street as a safety concern. And we've heard concerns about quality of life and the impact on residents of short-term rentals. That's not an overall blanket statement, but some folks have said their quality of life is greatly reduced by short-term rentals. Other people seem to get along with short-term rentals just fine. We've heard questions and concerns about taxes and licensing. Many folks feel that they're already paying enough in taxes and they don't want to pay any more fees. We've heard questions about the time frame for any regulations. When would they go into effect? If I have a property, would that be grandfathered? We've heard comments and questions about traffic. How much more traffic should I be expected to have on my street? There's already an increase in the number of cars that are moving through. It's a safety concern for me. And we've heard complaints about trash not being properly disposed of and litter. That's a general summary of the feedback we've received. And I want to go over some specific comments that we've received from short-term rental owners and see if this resonates with you. Now, this certainly doesn't cover every comment we've received, but this is some general feedback. Folks have told us short-term rental owners are a significant investment for me. I put my life savings into this. This is a dream of mine to live on the island, but I need to be able to rent out my house part-time to be able to keep it. Folks have said, I purchased my house or my condo knowing or expecting that I can rent it out. And that's important. I need to be able to do that. We've heard how important short-term rentals are to the island's tax base and the economy, and we recognize that. People point out not all short-term rental owners cause problems, and we completely understand that. And it's easy when you're talking about a problem to focus on the negative and to maybe feel like you're painting with a broad brush. Well, we're not trying to do that. We're trying to understand everyone's concerns and not characterize short-term rental owners as being negative to the island. Folks have said very clearly they don't want government overreach, and they don't want to pay more fees or taxes. The next steps for the projects include continuing stakeholder meetings and open houses. I mentioned a few different dates. Those are available on the town's website. The next public committee meeting will be Thursday, January 27th. It starts at 10 a.m. And again, the agenda for that meeting includes a link to the town's website where you can see through the Facebook public meetings page for the town. That's where you can view the meeting. You don't have to have a Facebook account to view the meeting. You can just click on the link. And if you signed up for project updates, you'll receive a link to the agenda and packet materials. You can take a look at that. Please be sure to sign up for project updates. Like I said, we'll be sending future agenda materials through that link, so you'll be aware of them immediately. Please, if you have any interest in attending any more upcoming stakeholder meetings or the open house, please do that. And please let people know who weren't able to attend today. The town hall survey will be open until January 31st. Please take that if you haven't already. You can see the upcoming meeting dates for the Public Planning Committee. And be sure to sign up to comment or speak during committee meetings or town council meetings. And one note I wanted to make is that the recordings for these meetings will be available. There'll be a link on the town's website to YouTube, so you can watch these videos if you'd like. And a summary of all of the comments, the Q&A from these meetings will be available on the town's website as well. Okay, thank you very much. And let's see. Before we get started with questions, I just want to note a couple of housekeeping issues. Again, at the bottom of your screen, there's a Q&A box. If you want to type out a question and have staff respond to it during the meeting without speaking during the meeting, that's the way to do that. The other option is to hit the raise hand button. If you hit that, we'll know that you want to speak, and we'll call on you and you can speak to everyone in the webinar. We ready to get started? Okay. Oh, okay. And I'll do my absolute best to pronounce your name correctly, but please let me know if I'm incorrect so I can correct that. Mr. Rinaldo?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yes, thank you first for having this. I certainly do appreciate it. I am in Sea Pines. I am a retiree. I have substantial retirement investment in this particular property. It is a large 7-bedroom property that we live in 4 months a year and rent during the busy season. I guess the first thing I would like to do is just confirm an understanding that I got from the management company, which is consistent with what you've said so far, namely that you're contemplating restrictions on the number of nights, restrictions on the number of guests, restrictions on the number of vehicles, and restrictions by street or area on short-term rentals. Can you confirm that those are in fact what you are considering? And would you be applying these equally across the entire island and including restrictions on large STRs like mine?
Thank you, Mr. Rinaldo. I think we are considering and have discussed primarily a range of options that other communities have used. At this point, and I apologize, I think there were 4 issues that you brought up, and I want to address them. I caught minimum number of nights, and I think occupancy limit, and I think vehicle limit, and I may have missed one. To address your concerns, we're discussing options. There's nothing proposed at this time that would limit the number of nights, the occupancy. And I apologize, I didn't get the other two, but at this point, we're considering recommendations that considering options other communities have used. But we haven't dialed in on a restriction, I think like minimum nights or occupancy. I think restrictions like that are pretty serious and deep rooted and have pretty far reaching impacts. I think we'd have to have pretty serious discussions about those kind of things before making a recommendation. I hope that that's clarifying. Is Mr. Ronaldo still available? Mr. Ronaldo, did I answer your question?
Yes, you did. May I ask one follow-up question?
Of course.
Okay, thank you. In terms of potential solutions, I for one agree with all of the STR input you've gotten so far. I think it's a very good capturing of at least my sense as well. I would offer a couple of other solutions that I think might work and be responsive. Number one, for the nuisance issues, which are behavioral issues, develop behavioral solutions rather than occupancy solutions. There's a lot of behavioral solutions that could impact the things that you're concerned about. Tackle that first before you do the occupancy limitations. Second point, I think it would be wise to be customized and narrow, at least at the beginning. Phase in whatever you're going to do, keep it narrow. It scared the heck out of me and probably a lot of others when I heard the possibility of what you might be doing, which my view would be that would be extreme, calamitous for me and property values broadly. So start smaller and then go larger than the other way. Three, I really feel strongly about grandfathering. To change the whole situation for existing renters, we'll invite, there'll be lawsuits, there'll be expenses, there'll be property values, and it'll be calamitous. So strongly would repeat that and give you one maybe you haven't thought about, but maybe put a limit on the second home owned by a second homeowner so that you aren't having two rental properties. Because in my case, I live in mine 4 months a year. I feel like I'm a resident. But if I owned another one, I would be more in it for commercial only uses. Now that would be a fair limitation. I just wanted to give you that for you to think about and welcome other discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate you bringing that up, and I appreciate you sharing your concerns because I think that's really important. And I apologize for that you were alarmed when you heard our discussion, and I appreciate your concerns. And it's completely understandable. We understand that people have made very significant investments in their property, and I can completely understand if they hear things are being discussed. Well, what does that mean? How significant is that? I think in terms of any regulations that would have a long tail or that are deep rooted, for example, limiting the number of short-term rentals on the island, limiting occupancy, requiring a minimum night stay, those are options that other communities have used. We would need a very detailed discussion of that before moving forward. So I hope that allays your fears to some extent. I don't want to speak for the committee or for town council, but we understand that those would have very serious ramifications. It would need a considerable amount of discussion before making any recommendations to that extent. And I appreciate your comments about nuisance issues needing a behavioral solution. I think that having a customized and narrow ordinance is very sensible, and I appreciate that comment. Thank you very much. Okay. Oh, is this Mr. Merkovich?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. I have, I guess, some general questions, and you and I have talked a little bit by email about this, but before we get into proposing limits and guests and occupancy and all those things, I guess I'm not sure that I understand the problem, what we're trying to solve. what you've said is short-term rentals have increased over the last 3 years. So it seems like a big leap to me just to assume that all of the problems are now attributable to short-term rentals. I mean, and before I even get into what the problems are that you mentioned, I mean, how do we know that they're attributable to short-term rentals? Do we know that long-term rentals have gone down? Do we know that, long-term residents have decreased? Do we know that daily visitors from, that come and spend the day at the beach and leave aren't the ones causing the problems, whatever they are? So I'm just trying to find the link I've read what's out there and I've heard, some people talk, but I haven't seen anything that says this is all these issues that you're mentioning are potential problems or problems. How are they linked, or how do we know they're directly due to short-term rentals? Is it just because the rentals have increased? So that's kind of the opening question. And then I do have some just specifically to some of the noise, trash, parking specific problems that have been identified. But I'm just, I guess, wondering, I'm not saying those aren't problems, but first of all, I think we need to be sure that we know the cause of those problems. And it seems to be a big assumption here already made. Maybe I'm just missing something, that they're clearly and directly due to short-term rentals, not to anything else. So can you speak to that first?
Sure, I'd be happy to. And thank you for bringing that up. In terms of understanding the problem, before we started this program, we received a lot of complaints about a number of issues. We did receive quite a few complaints about short-term rentals that we could identify as short-term rentals, and primarily those nuisance issues that you brought up: noise, trash, and parking. And in many cases, it's very clearly identified to a short-term rental. And these are brought up by residents who live there. So they know their neighborhood and they know that these houses are short-term rentals, even if it weren't for the little sign on the house that identified it as such. If you take a look at the feedback we've received in the focus group meetings, we have notes from that'll be published in the packet for the upcoming Public Planning Committee meeting. You can review and see what folks' concerns are. There was a meeting earlier today, and we had a couple of residents talk about the issues that they've had with short-term rentals. And then if you look at the survey results from the Open Town Hall survey and review some of the feedback, you'll see folks complaining about short-term rentals and the issues that they've had. And they do cover what we've discussed today. There are nuisance issues, noise, trash, parking, and then there are greater concerns about changes to the character of neighborhoods. Folks who've lived here for a long time, who lived in an area that was primary residential, and maybe there were some short-term rentals, but that's increased dramatically in the recent past. So I hope that gets to the first part of your question and answers that. And you had another question that you wanted to ask?
Well, no, it does. And again, based on what you said, basically residents are complaining because they know the neighborhood and they believe the issues are related to short-term rentals. And I guess that's a decent connection. I guess they ought to know. I'm not doubting that. But as to those issues that seem to be attributable that you mentioned about noise, trash, and parking, I mean, aren't those issues that if they're noisy at 3 a.m, you call the police? I mean, when you do that, whether they're your neighbor that lives there full time or whether they're just passing through and are up at 3 a.m. causing problems, or whether they're long or short-term rental. I'm not sure we need an ordinance for rentals for, like the other gentleman said, for behavioral issues. I would think there's already laws and ordinance about quiet time, you can't carry on in the middle of the night, put your trash out, you can't litter. I mean, that applies to every human being on this island, not short-term rentals. So again, I'm not sure why we need something more than just enforce the existing laws and rules if those are the issues. And those seem to be repeated several times. Now, just before I'll be quiet in a minute, but when you touch on the character of the neighborhoods, that's a little more interesting topic that I would like to hear more about. But if it's changing from residential to strictly short-term rentals, yeah, that changes the character of the island. That has a lot of impacts in many ways. But as to noise, trash, and parking, again, it's almost like you're suggesting that, all the noise, trash, and parking is due to short-term rentals. If it is, just enforce the laws, call the police on these people, fine them. If they're throwing their trash around, pick them up for littering. I mean, I don't know that you need an ordinance. I mean, if we don't have an ordinance on the island for that, it seems like we should, but I bet we already do. So that's my only point about those particular issues. If you're parking in the wrong spot, you're parking illegally, that's not unique to short-term rentals, I'm sure. Just enforce the parking rules. So that's my comment on those particular subsets of the broader issue. Noise, trash, and parking. It seems like there's already something in place, I would bet, to address that. Maybe I'm wrong. Tell me if there isn't.
Sure. And I've heard that comment in previous meetings with folks that, we have a sheriff's department and we have laws and we should just enforce those laws. And I appreciate your perspective on that. The one thing I would mention is for some folks have the opinion that they don't necessarily want to call the police over a trash issue or contact the police over a parking issue, that if they live next to their neighbor, they would go knock on the door and say, hey, your trash is the problem, or, your kid threw a party over the weekend and it was really loud. Can we address that? There's no way for people to take that first step and reach out to a neighbor. There's no, if there's no requirement to have contact information for a short-term rental. So that was one of the comments that we heard back was, it seems like there would be a way to manage some of these things neighbor to neighbor or person to person without having to get the sheriff involved. So that just some feedback on those points. And I appreciate what you've said, and we've heard those comments.
Well, yeah, and again, you can, if the person next to you is causing problems, you don't know necessarily whether they're a short-term, long-term visitor passing through the night or whatever. If they're causing problems, go confront them. Hey, get your trash off. You can't throw your garbage outside on the sidewalk. And if they give you a lip or they give you a hard time, again, to me, whether they're my neighbor that lives there full time or whether they're a short-term renter, doesn't matter. If they don't want to abide or they give you, difficulty over that, then you call the police. So you still have that as an option if they are near you in your complex, your neighbor, whether they live there all day, all year, for 2 nights. If they're carrying on late at night, you knock on their door and say, hey, it's 2 a.m, keep it down. They got their trash out all over the place. You go over and say, hey, use your garbage can. And then you've warned them, just like you would if they're your neighbor full time. And if they don't comply, then you call the authorities. So that's still an option, whether they're a full-time or a short-term renter. Again, I don't see why there's such a distinction here for those kinds of issues. But I hear you. That's just my rebuttal to that, is you still have those options.
Thank you. I take your point. Thank you very much. Ms. Carper? Ms. Carper, you may need to unmute yourself.
Did it take?
We gotcha. Thank you.
Okay. All right. My name is Rhonda Carter. I live in a Gullah Geechee community that has now become a resort haven. We have mostly rentals. We only have about 3 homes here. I live here full time, but I work in another state. So I only have 1 home, but I pay 6% tax. All my neighbors rent their homes. And most of the time it's fine. It's good. I understand when you buy a home as an investment home to rent, you want to rent it. So I am empathetic to that. it is the fact that the onus of having all these renters in our community falls on the people that live here. So just an example of our neighborhood, which is unique and different. We have had an increase of over 200 people be in about a 10-acre area every single week for the last 4 years. So we went from having single homes being torn down and these huge homes being built. And I know we're not unique in that fact that there is a lot of places. I mean, I think on Island right now, there is 4 or 5 permits of 8, 9, 10 bedroom homes. So the thing is, the volume and the masses of people and construction and cars and the detriment that it's having on our infrastructures. I mean, even to the fact of water. I live at the end of the road, and if the people at the beginning of the road are all here in the summer, I cannot even get water pressure. So there is an impact, and we can't be oblivious to that. And I understand, I get it when you own a home and you want to rent it, but I think we all have to look here and say, what do we want? As someone that owns a short-term rental, like the gentleman that was speaking before, I'm assuming at some point he's going to want to move here full-time. What do you want to see? What do they want to see? The damage on our beaches for the hundreds and hundreds of people that go over our boardwalk, and all of that stuff, that is put on the people that live here. We're also unique as we don't have an HOA, because this was a Gullah Geechee community that was sold off separately. And then different developers came in and did things. So, but still, I'm the one out there trimming the bushes, pulling up the board, making sure somebody's not tripping. And the people that rent their homes, like my neighbors, and all my neighbors are great. They're making money. They're paying 6%, just like I am, but they're making hundreds of thousands of dollars on their homes so that they can have them. But meanwhile, nothing's being put back into the community. And same thing with the property management companies. They come in, they load people in the houses. They don't tell them about rules. They don't tell them about noise. You call these companies, and I do, when something gets out of control. And most of the time I love the noise of kids laughing in pools and everybody seeing each other and all that. I love where I live. But sometimes I do have to call because, somebody's yelling in the middle of the night or screaming or fighting, or they're parking all over our road and I can't get through. The police can't not enforce that. And they will tell you that they cannot do it. So we need to have some kind of something, either the property management companies have to set something up so that we have a way to enforce this stuff, because I'm out there, I'm picking up trash, I'm picking up dog poop, I'm taking care because I put that time and money into my property as well. And I would like to live here. I realized where I chose to live when I moved here, there were smaller homes. And I think that's something that's happening all over the island. These little homes, beach homes, are being torn down and these massive homes are being built. And is there a point where at capacity? Is there a point where the damage is too far gone? So that when these people that do own these homes say, oh, I'm ready to retire, or I have the opportunity to work from somewhere else, I want to live there full time, is it going to look the same? So I guess what we have to say is, how do we keep our island beautiful? How do we keep it? Why did I choose to live here? Why did they choose to buy an investment home here? Because it's beautiful. We love it. We love the environment. We love the beaches. We love everything. But unfortunately, if you bring masses and masses of people on the island and we're not able to do everything, and I know people that, work on beach patrol and work in trash and parking and do this, it's nonstop. When is enough enough? Or how do we solve that? There has to be a common ground here that we can kind of all reach and get to. And again, the goal is to preserve our island. We all want that. So how do we do that?
Thank you, Ms. Carper. I really appreciate your comments. That you covered a wide range. And I think many things that we've heard before and that we discussed in the presentation. I appreciate your pointing out a couple of things in particular, that achieving that balance. That we need to ensure that our unique island remains that way, and it remains that way for residents and visitors. I think that's important for our economy, and I appreciate that. And we're going to consider all of the issues that you raised in our discussions moving forward. Thank you. Okay. Oh, Mr. Marshall.
Hi, thanks. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. I've already gone back and forth, sent you emails and been commenting on the questions, so there's no point in going over that. But I'm just wondering if you're considering adding any more fees or taxes. And if you realize that we're paying taxes on the same property and the same money over and over again. The annual property taxes, the rental taxes, the quarterly aid taxes we collect, which by the way makes millions of dollars for the island. Do you want to remind Ms. Carper of that? The Beaufort County taxes, now the business taxes and fees. This doesn't include the state and federal taxes we pay on the money. So I'm wondering if you're considering any more taxes or fees. I think that probably to destroy the folks the camel's back. I also think it's important to consider mom and pop versus investment companies. I think someone mentioned that. You won't know, you own one retirement property, you rent it out so that it will pay for itself when you retire, versus the people that own multiple units. I hope you're considering that. Finally, it came up that you still have the same number of units on the island, regardless of how they're used. So if they're not short-term rentals, you'll have more people coming in, or you're foreclosing and they're going to be empty. So they're all, the condominiums and everything is there already. So the occupancy is not changed. You might even have less occupancy when you have short-term rentals. You don't rent 365 days a year. So that's some of the things I want to mention. I don't know if you wanted to address them. And then I guess the aid taxes. If you shooting the goose that laid the golden egg, really, with the millions and millions of dollars we're providing in aid taxes. The beach nourishment, all the beautiful venues and facilities that you build. I think we should all stand up our short-term rentals and take a bow, because that's where the money is coming from. Did you want to, before I keep rambling, did you want to address some of these things?
Yes, ma'am. I think I heard most of what you said. It was just, there's a little audio issue. It wasn't you. Regarding fees and taxes, that's definitely a comment that we've heard previous to today and during today's earlier meetings. And I appreciate that point. I think before considering any additional fees and taxes, that would need to have a serious discussion because of the things that you mentioned, the number of fees and taxes that people are already paying for their properties. And you mentioned differentiating between kind of a mom and pop investment property versus folks who own multiple properties. And we've heard that today too, is that, folks who say, I'm a responsible owner, I own, a unit or 2 units. I live here part of the year. I'm invested in the community and I take care of things. We've definitely heard that today, that they don't want to necessarily be lumped in with folks who just buy properties for investment. So I take your point on that. In terms of the number of units on the island, I believe there are some properties that are being built specifically for short-term rentals, and that may have increased recently. In terms of the amount of use of the property, I think we can look into some numbers and dial down into the data once we have a contract with a short-term rental monitoring company, that'll provide a significant more amount of data, so we can really dial in and see exactly what the impacts are of short-term rentals and the trend in that change. I'm sorry, I hope that answered or at least addressed what you brought up. And did you have any other comments or questions you'd like to add to that?
No, just to set a few people straight, we really don't make money hand over fist. People think that, and between the insurance and the regime fees, our regime fee is $600 a month. So, if you could mention that somewhere, you've got the insurance, the travel expenses, the parking fees, the supplies, maintenance. I mean, I've been through 3 dishwashers and 3 garbage disposal, utilities, technology, the marketing. we really are not making the kind of money people think these people are making thousands. We're really not, you know. In our case, we don't break even. Sometimes we're in the red because of some of these things. So, you know, with these people that are pointing a finger and demonizing us or saying that we're making so much on this, we're not. A lot of us, it was just to, you know, to buy the property and pay off the mortgage on it and own it, and then maybe move into it down the road to retire. So I just want to put that out there that, you know, we're not getting rich on this. But, you know, the island is beautiful, and you're going to have all these people coming and going no matter what. No matter how, you know, you've had the same number of people. But, thanks very much, and I'll be in touch.
Thank you for joining us. I appreciate it. Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Harris? Mr. Harris, I think you might need to unmute yourself. Oh, I think we've got you. Mr. Harris? Your mute keeps going on and off. Mr. Harris, can you try to unmute yourself? There we go. Oh, no. Mr. Harris, are you ready?
I'm going to mute Mr. Harris.
Okay. We're going to try to connect with Mr. Ross and get right back to Mr. Harris. Mr. Ross?
I'm here,
Yes, sir.
and thanks for all the information. I think it's really smart that we're trying to get out in front of the growth that we're seeing. So I'm happy that there's a lot of opportunities for input. Looking forward to being part of the process. I own several rental properties in Hilton Head. So just a couple questions. Do we have a definition of a short-term rental?
No, sir, we don't at this point, and that's part of what we'll need to establish moving forward.
And do we know, are we having a lot of 1, 2, 3 day rentals? Do we know if that versus a week or a month?
Thank you for bringing that up. And that's one of the data points that we can get from the short-term rental monitoring company. We're finalizing our contract with them right now, and we'll be able to kind of do a deep dive. They have a tremendous amount of information about properties on the island, both trends, but really getting down into data about price per night, minimum night stay, the occupancy of the units, and we'll be able to provide that information shortly.
Yeah, I think that'll be interesting. Is, you know, maybe I think as we start to define what a short-term rental is, people might not be as scared of this initiative as the initial. I think everybody kind of takes it as, oh, we're going to stop rentals happening in Hilton Head. I don't think that's the intent of this at all. I think we all understand the importance of them. But if we are getting a lot of 2-day rentals through Airbnb and that, I mean, I could see the strain that's going to put on the infrastructure that we have here. So that's my first question. My second question is, are there things we can do from an infrastructure standpoint? You know, I don't want to sound crazy here, but even if it cost us more in tax, are we just out of space here? Are we just out of space for the garbage, for the cars? I know when I come in and out all the time. When I was down in the 4th of July week, I landed at the airport. It looked like I was in Atlanta at the Hilton Head Airport. I mean, it was packed. And as a property owner, it's great. We have lots of people coming. Have we just kind of reached our max? And are we looking at some infrastructure investments and what the cost of those be to be able to just handle more? I mean, I think the island COVID's done wonders for the island because everybody now wants to come here and rent their own house. They don't want to go to the Caribbean. They don't want to go to Mexico. They don't want to go outside the US. They want to drive somewhere. And, it's great and we're all enjoying the boom. I know some of the, maybe the permanent residents, it may be some nuisance, but we're enjoying some great growth. Can we support that through infrastructure versus let's maybe start limiting what we can do? It was just a question that I'm just interested in as we go along, not looking for you to answer that, Ann, by any means. I know you guys are in the exploratory phase here. And then my last question is, do communities have the right to decide for themselves how, because I know in my time as an investor here in Hilton Head, there's some communities that it's kind of known there's no rentals there. And, I've got properties in North Forest Beach and Sea Pines. Those are both rental communities. Are there communities that have said and have, HOAs that rentals are not allowed? And as we go forward, are communities allowed to decide for themselves, or is it one blanket, hey, here's the new Hilton Head policy?
Thank you for that, for those points. I think that was extremely helpful, especially your first point that after your question about data, about balance and about understanding the importance of short-term rentals to the economy. I haven't heard any strong desire to ban short-term rentals or take any kind of dramatic steps in that kind of way. I think everyone understands the importance of short-term rentals to the island's economy, and I appreciate you bringing that up. In terms of capacity, the town is undertaking, and you can read about it in the town strategic plan that was recently approved by town council, a island-wide conditions and trends assessment to look at some of those larger issues that you mentioned that short-term rentals are definitely a part of, but they're part of a larger picture of where we're going in the future in the island. I think there are a lot of data points that we can look at and analyze to make some decisions about things like infrastructure investment. So that was a wonderful point, and thank you for bringing that up. In terms of can communities decide for themselves, certainly. 3 of the large gated communities on the island, Shipyard, Sea Pines, and Palmetto Dunes, do allow short-term rentals. Hilton Head Plantation, for example, does not currently allow them, and they made that decision for themselves. And there are, I think, maybe 3 or 4 grandfathered properties in that community. But certainly if an HOA or a POA says that's not right for our community, they can make that choice. So thank you for your points.
Are we
Yes, sir.
seeing that places that have either stated they're not, rentals aren't allowed, or traditionally rentals haven't occurred? I'm assuming we're starting to see rentals pop up in those areas. Is part of this, or is it just the communities that allow rentals are just bursting at the seam with rentals?
You're just to clarify your question, the question is, are short-term rentals encroaching or starting to pop up in areas where they weren't before?
Yeah, I mean, I guess
Yeah.
is the cause of the angst that people living in Hilton Head Plantation, who are used to that not being a rental area, all of a sudden there's rental properties in there? Or is it that North Forest Beach, where we do rentals, that's what it is, there's just now too many of them for the community, that part of the beach to support? I mean, what's really the core of the issue here?
I understand your question. Thank you for clarifying. I think it's both. There are short-term rentals that are in neighborhoods that previously were entirely residential, that I was frankly shocked to find out had short-term rentals in them. And to some folks, that's very concerning. They chose those areas well away from tourist areas because they knew, I won't have to deal with short-term rentals here. Now, whether they want to ban them or allow them in their neighborhood, that is up to them. In terms of folks who live in areas that allow short-term rentals and always have, and are experiencing extreme issues with short-term rentals, or maybe not extreme, but some nuisance issues with short-term rentals. And that varies to, annoyances to things that are really impinging on their lifestyle. We've heard that too. There was in a previous meeting today, a gentleman who lives in Sea Pines, who lived in an area of Sea Pines where that neighborhood, now Sea Pines itself, I think is always had short-term rentals. I think the number has increased, and the areas where the short-term rentals are located have increased. So some folks who lived in areas that are maybe frequented by tourists, but that specific area didn't have a lot of tourists in it. They're experiencing more short-term rentals in their area. So I think it's a yes and to answer your question.
Got it. Got it. All right. Well, I'm happy to help in any way that I can as you guys navigate what's, a complicated issue with, I think, strong opinions on both sides. So I think Hilton Head's always done a nice job of staying in front and maintaining the brand. And I think that's very important. So happy to help.
Thank you very much. And thanks for participating today.
You got it.
Mr. Harris available?
He dropped off now, so
Mr. Semke?
Yes. Hi, Ann. Thanks for taking my question. I'm a property owner in Sea Pines, part-time resident. I do it short-term rentals seasonally, and I'm the president of my regime. So my question is actually about regimes and the role of the regimes in this initiative. So is some of the ideas, the challenges, the feedback, are they coming from regimes, from individuals, in both, or both? Or are you finding that regimes aren't in tune with these challenges and are not taking actions and are not effective? Or historically they have, and they've just come to a point where they can no longer manage it? And the reason I kind of bring it up is my regime is very active. Every day this week, I've had calls and taken actions related to things that we've talked about here. And historically, we've been very effective in our regime with behaviors on bicycles, on the sidewalks, on towels, on the patios, on illegal parking, number of cars allowed. And to date, with our 21 units and 21 owners and our mix of residents and a mix of rentals, we've been able to maintain peace and harmony and keep it under control. And so I guess just the role of the regimes, and I guess I would submit, at least in my experience, the regimes, I think, share the passion of what's being discussed here, and that they could be a very powerful part, if not the solution to this.
Thank you. I appreciate your comments. Yes, we have heard from several regimes. We've heard from folks who live in regimes, and they do have varying experiences. We've heard from folks just like you who have well-managed regimes and they're very active. We've heard from folks who live in regimes that aren't very active and don't feel that their regime is effectively addressing issues that they're having. So we have heard a variety of points on that. I really appreciate your participation today, and I'm hoping that we'll have a great representation moving forward from regimes so that, as you mentioned, they can be part of the solution to any problems that might be occurring.
Yeah. One very quick follow-up. Do you have a sense for the number of short-term rentals covered under a regime versus not covered under a regime? Do you have a feel for that?
I don't have the data on that. I'd be willing to look into that to see if we can get that information for you.
Great. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you for participating today. I appreciate it. Okay, Mr. Oliver?
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Hey, thanks for doing this. I own a condo in Palmetto Dunes. Live there part of the year and rent it out part of the year. And PD is kind of ahead of the game here. We've already, you probably know this, we've already implemented some STRs. And there are restrictions on minimum number of nights, and I'm not going to remember them all, and minimum number of guests based on a formula of the bedrooms, I think it is, that the property has. And there were some other ones, and so I don't really have a question. I just have maybe just a couple of comments. I do think the property managers have a role to play in this in terms of the nuisance issues. I know that just to back up for a second, PD, we're required if we rent our property out on a short-term basis in Palmetto Dunes, we have to post these placards in the unit, and you know, it's got a variety of things on it. You know, don't feed the alligators, you know, and bicycles and so on and so forth. And so there's a list of things that the guests, you know, see. But I think the property owners, or the property managers, you know, they don't really want to do anything that's gonna tick off a guest who's on vacation. But I do think they probably need to be encouraged to be more upfront with the guests with some of these things, some of the nuisance things, some of the things that they shouldn't be doing, whether they're going to do them or not. You know, when we're in our condo, occasionally when we're in our condo, there'll be somebody right above us that's a renter, and they're just making a ton of noise, and we'll go up and bang on their doors and bang on the door and tell them to knock it off. But so that's kind of what I wanted to say. I think you know, I can reiterate the whole, you know, what a lot of people have said here. I mean, that there's a lot of income that is generated for the town from people that come to vacation in Hilton Head. And I think people, you know, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. And so the people that are complaining about some of this stuff, they need to remember that, as I understand it, we pay twice as much property tax not living there than someone who is a full-time resident for a similarly valued property. And I may be wrong on that, but and there's the beach enhancement fee that the guests pay, that tax that allows the purchase of the land on the island. It also, I think, pays for the beach nourishment, which is a huge expense that occurs every few years. So, you know, there's a lot of things that good things that come with the bad things, and I just think that all needs to be you know, kind of put out there, and people need to understand that as well, and have kind of the whole complete picture. And I'll just shut up at this point. That's all I really had to say.
Thank you, Mr. Oliver. That's exactly it, is seeing the whole complete picture. And thank you for your comments. I really appreciate that. I was actually looking at the Palmetto Dunes placard just the other day with the information about the alligators. I think a lot of communities like using those to say, welcome to the guests, but you know, you are part of our community. Hilton Head is a special community, and here's why. And here's some things that we'd like you to do to be a good neighbor. That's a lot of communities use that, and I think that makes some sense. But thank you for your comments, and thank you for joining us today. Ms. Schneider?
Yes.
Yes.
So I have a question. My family and I have owned a condo in Sea Pines since the 80s, before I was born, and it is tracked down through the family, and it's now on the latest generation. I also live on the island as a full-time resident, and I do also work in a property management company as well. So I feel like I've kind of got all spectrums on this. And I do understand all aspects. You know, the first thing the family and I saw who are out of state, we did freak out on the number of nights, because we know there's Martha's Vineyard, you have the Ozarks, you have the Outer Banks. They have minimum night requirements, they have max night requirements. They also have percentages of the area that are allowed to have rentals. So if you have a 100 square foot area, only about 20% of your rentals are allowed via the population. And I think that's one thing we were very worried about. Are you going to limit that? Which I've heard comments, you know, it doesn't sound like that is. And I do agree from a property management standpoint that you should, for nuisance calls and all that, the property management company should be heavily involved. You know, we are the ones that reach out to the guests whenever we hear any comment from neighbors. We do reach out. We do say, you know, this is a community. We have signs, we have everything. You do our due diligence. And I think there needs to be something of a mix between, because I wonder if the people that are year round that hate short-term rentals, so to speak, because it's ruining their lifestyle, which I completely understand, but that lifestyle is benefiting from the influx of all of these guests that are pulling money into Hilton Head. I went to school at Hilton Head High. I remember when stores and all these things are just driving out of Hilton Head. I mean, Bluffton has boomed in the 10, 15 years since I've been here. And I think if by COVID kind of, no offense, saved Hilton Head, because look at all these restaurants coming into the island. They're pouring thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars into this island for its infrastructure. And so I think we should be careful with saying we're limiting people, because if you start scaring the guest off, we have nothing else besides a beach that will pull people in. And if we can keep the beaches there, we can keep the short-term rentals and maybe put a little bit more on the property management team to go, all right, nuisance calls. All right, you need to get working on the trash. You know, your guests are overflowing trash. I mean, as long as the property management company is willing to work with the guests and the residents, they're the bread and butter of it, because they're going to make the owners happy. They're going to make the guests happy. And we are your residents. We can see both sides. And I think if we involve them a little bit more and kind of get with them and the regimes and the HOAs, we can make things go smoother. And so I do agree with the parking. I agree with the nuisance, the trash and all of that. But I think if we start messing with nights, amount of guests into a home and all of that, you're really going to start messing economically with the island. And that freaks me out more as a resident than it does as a property owner and as an employee of the island. Sorry, that was kind of like a statement in question. So what are you going to do to put me as a resident at ease and me as a property owner at ease and me as a person that my livelihood depends on both? How are you going to put somebody in my shoes, or the owners and the residents? How are you going to put us at ease with all of this that's going on?
Sure. And thank you for your comment. I appreciate that. And I apologize that you feel dis-ease. I understand there's a lot there, and I understand it's very important. And I want to assure you, everyone understands the importance of the issue that we're talking about. It's broad, and it's very important to folks in a lot of different ways. Like you mentioned, as a resident, as a you've got property that you're concerned about, and you're in the industry. And I appreciate your perspective. It's not lost on anyone that we are a hospitality-based economy. And the importance of that, I think, is going to be considered in every decision that we make moving forward. So I appreciate what you said about that. I will note, and you mentioned other communities, Martha's Vineyard, the Outer Banks. I understand that other communities have, rental. Obviously, we looked at their rental ordinance, or short-term rental ordinances, and the different techniques that they used. And I want to assure you, we're going to find the right solution for our island. We're a unique community, and we need to dial in a solution that works just for us. So we're not taking something off the shelf. And I don't think it makes any sense to take a very hard stand on something that is so important to our economy going in. I've heard loud and clear from folks saying, start with the nuisance issues, focus on the things there should be a baseline level of hospitality, both for residents and guests, that we all get along and can focus on those issues and discuss the issues like island capacity, the number of folks who are here, and use some data in those discussions. So that's what we've heard from these discussions. And I hope that addresses what your concerns or comments.
It definitely does. Are you, sorry to do a follow-up, but are you going to try to involve the property management companies into this, try to assure the long-term residents that are here that are probably having, little bit of freakouts over how many guests, are you going to try to put more pressure on the property management company to reach out to their guests and really force the not implications, but the implement of nuisance, trash, all of that? Are you going to hold them more, not so much accountable, but go, you need to contact more with your guests versus, the one lady that was here earlier that she's, the one that's having to pick up dog poop and all that? Like, are you going to put more pressure on the companies, or are you kind of just, where are you gauging to go into that?
Sure. I think it's, I think having property, either the owner or an agent or property management company be responsible for the properties is definitely an avenue that we need to discuss. I don't think there's necessarily a quick solution that's going to resolve some of the issues that we're talking about, especially some of those nuisance issues. I think that education is going to be really important. We've seen that in previous issues that we've had on the island. So you're aware of sea turtle protection, and people are really interested in protecting sea turtles. And so both our residents and visitors are invested in that. And when you can tell people the story of why Hilton Head is a unique community and convey that to them, they, I think, take a little bit of sense of ownership for their own behavior while they're here. And, we've heard, I experienced this myself, over the years, people who visit turn into residents. And I think that's part of our community. And so I think if we can convey to folks, you're on an island in a community, it's special, here's why it's special, and we're welcoming you, and we want to make you a part of that community. I think that education component is going to be a big factor in making this successful.
No, I mean, we really do have a particular island. I mean, I'm originally from Hawaii, so from one islander to another, you do have something amazing going on that Hawaii does have, but we have a 5-hour flight. You have a 5-minute crossover onto the bridge. So it's a lot better. And so I don't want it to see this island, disintegrate, but I also don't want to lose its history. And so I do like your comments and how you're going about it. And it's going to be interesting to see, from the 3 aspects of how I am, and I'm sure a bunch of other people that are residents, workers, and owners, how you're going to come about this. So I'm excited to see it, and I hope it all works out well.
Thank you. I really appreciate you participating today. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Ms. Dornish.
Yes. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So my biggest question, comment that I have is, I have a management company who post signs. They do an extremely good job of making the guest aware of all of the rules and regulations that they as a company put in place, as well as the communities. My question is I guess, in the instance, because I mean, the guest signs a contract and we have signs everywhere. How are we supposed to enforce these ordinances that you are proposing to put in place for, noise and trash? Because as much as they do what they can do, these are grown adults who are going to do what they want. And a lot of people pay a lot of money to come and visit with family. To then have so I guess I don't fully understand what is expected from owners and property managers when we feel like we're doing so much. And I feel like a lot of what you're referring to falls on those absentee owners who buy a rental property here and then manage it from another state.
Sure. I understand exactly what you're saying. And we've heard that from many people, that either they own the property or they're a property manager, and they do a great job. And they say, I take care of issues. I stay on top of things. And I don't think anyone expects perfection. I certainly wouldn't say that. I think that you're always going to have some visitors who, regardless of your absolute best efforts, don't follow the rules. And
in that instance, then, I mean, with this ordinance, in that instance that I have a guest that throws their party and won't be quiet, the cops are called. Are you proposing some kind of penalty on us as a property management company or on myself as an owner because my guest did not listen to their rules and regulations? Or are you proposing a whole separate police department task force for just short-term rentals to help in all of these calls that we're being told that you guys are getting?
Any ordinances that are proposed or actually approved by town council would be enforced with the same principle that we've used previously, I believe. And that is voluntary compliance through education. So our code enforcement officers work with folks when there are violations to explain the requirements and regulations and come up with solutions. And I don't think it would benefit anyone to take a hard line and say, we're going to come out and start issuing citations to folks. I haven't heard support for that in the comments we've received. What I've heard from folks is, we're going to do our best. We're going to try to manage properties well. We understand that you're going to have some outliers, but if there's responsiveness to problems that come up, that's meeting the spirit of any kind of regulations that we would want to put in place. I hope that addresses your comment or question.
It does. I did have one other question. I was just curious if you guys were looking into or addressing any ordinances that revolve around building permits, because many of the things that are stated and that many people have a problem with were things that were approved and we were given permission to build these houses this way and to put them the way that they were, but now we're being told that it's not okay.
Well, just to clarify, nothing is proposed at this point in terms of restricting the use of, for example, a single family home as a short-term rental as a use. And we've heard a lot of folks comment about grandfathering. If I have this use now, will I be able to do it in the future? I haven't heard any strong support for kind of turning back the clock, so to speak, or taking away those rights. And we've heard from folks saying, I bought with the expectation I could do this. I think just like you said, you said, we're allowed to do this. We want to continue doing that. And so what we've heard, kind of loud and clear from folks is, we want to be able to use the property in the way that you said we could.
Okay. And then my only last question is, are there specific areas outside of your gated communities that you are focusing on that are complaining the most about wanting to be residential?
We've heard from a number of different areas. I don't know that there's anyone complaining the most, so to speak, but we've seen, I think one caller mentioned before, is it the issue of short-term rentals moving into areas they weren't before, or is it an issue of increase in short-term rentals in an area that kind of already had them? And I think it's the case in both. I think in some neighborhoods that previously didn't have any short-term rentals, there are concerns about short-term rentals moving into those areas. And like I said, if they have a POA or HOA that wants to address that, want to form one to address that, that's certainly within their rights. And then there are some areas where there were some short-term rentals, but there was more of a mix of residential and short-term rentals, and they've seen an increase in that. And so we've seen concern from both of those areas.
Okay. That was all I had. Thank you for your time.
Great. Thank you so much. Oh, Mr. Harris? You may need to unmute yourself, Mr. Harris.
I'm sorry, I don't have a comment.
Oh, okay. You just had your hand raised. That's why I asked. Thank
Well,
you.
it's been fluttering back and forth between lower hand and raised hand.
I'm sorry about that.
That's
But thank you
okay.
for joining us today. Mr. Gorman?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Hi, so I appreciate your time, and I think I have a better understanding of exactly what you guys are trying to do, and I can appreciate that. I understand a lot of decisions haven't been made and need to be researched and looked through. I guess I'm looking more on what is the process you guys are going through when you do decide to finalize any of these. Is there going to be, a formal posting of what these, the final decisions are before they're voted? Is it going to be voted on, in person with the township? How does that actually work when it comes down to the hard, fast rules that eventually will have to happen?
Sure. Thank you for bringing it up. That's an excellent question. I'll give you a thumbnail sketch of how ordinances typically proceed, and then I'll let you know how to stay informed. So ordinances at the direction of town council direct staff to work on different issues, for example, short-term rentals. And we give reports and receive direction from the Public Planning Committee at their monthly meetings. And again, for the Public Planning Committee, that's the fourth Thursday of each month at 10 a.m. The next meeting is January 27th. And the committee will, in some cases, ask staff to draft an ordinance. Staff would bring that drafted ordinance back to the committee for review. That's during public meetings. During the public meetings, the committee would comment on the draft ordinance, and there will be opportunity for public comment, both verbal during the meeting and written. And of course, any communication that you would want to provide to committee members and town council. If the committee recommends approval of the ordinance, would be a recommendation that would be made to the full town council. That would be discussed during a town council meeting. And again, there will be opportunities for public discussion and comment on that ordinance. For our town council, ordinances are approved by majority vote, and there are 2 votes. So you have one majority vote and another if the town council wants to approve the ordinance. There are dates to consider and keep in mind. If an ordinance is approved, you would have the date the ordinance is approved. And it could be that the effective date, the date those rules go into place, are the date the ordinance is approved. Or you could have an effective date later than the date the ordinance is approved. So for example, you could say, I'm going to pass this law on July 1st, but it'll go into effect on October 1st. So I hope that gives an idea of the process. And to stay involved, if you sign up for project updates, there's a blue button on the town's website under short-term rentals. You'll receive meeting agendas related to this initiative. So you'll be aware of upcoming meetings. You can read through the agenda and see what's going to be discussed during that meeting so you can participate. And so any ordinance that comes out of this process will go through the process I just described. And you can stay on top of that by receiving the notifications and seeing the upcoming meeting agendas for the committee and town council meetings. I hope that answered your question.
It does. Just a quick follow-up. I know I did see somewhere there was a rough timeline of what when you're trying to actually go through these steps. Off the top of your head, do you know roughly when the goal is for the finalization of any of these proposals?
Sure. There's a timeline on the project website, and we actually reviewed that in the presentation today. We're just wrapping up data input and stakeholder input and feedback and the survey, the first phase of really getting our arms around short-term rentals and the issues that we're discussing. At the next public planning committee, staff would like to discuss the timeline with the committee. So I would take a look at that meeting. You can find the agenda packet if you sign up for project updates. Take a look at the materials in that packet and attend that meeting, or you can view the video later. It's also available on YouTube. The meetings are recorded. But if you take a look at that, staff has some ideas about that timeline that we want to share with the committee.
Great. That's everything for me. I appreciate your time.
Thank you so much. Ms. Fantano?
I think that all of the people before me have addressed all my concerns, so I'm fine.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Thanks for attending today.
Sure.
Mr. Morrison? Mr. Morrison, you may need to unmute yourself.
At the next one.
Okay. Move on to the next question and get back to Mr. Morrison if you have a question or comment. Sir, I cannot pronounce your last name. It's Nicholas and it starts with an S. If you can help me out, I'd really appreciate it. I'm sorry?
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you very much for putting those virtual meetings together. And I also expect it's not an easy seat to sit into on your side. So thank you for doing that. My wife and I, my family actually, we visited the Hilton Head multiple times in the last 20 years as a family using short-term rentals. And this year we decided to buy a unit that we will eventually rent as a rental. I don't know if it's going to be short-term. It's probably going to be short-term, but we're going to occupy as well. And we have really a vested interest to see Hilton Head stay the beautiful place we have known it to be, the quiet place, the family-oriented area. And but when I see these issues here, I'm a little bit concerned that first of all, the meeting is called short-term rentals. So that already implies that someone has pre-assumed or identified that to be the culprit. I think it might be wise to change the title and say something like quality of life preservation or whatever, but not necessarily point the finger at short-term rentals, because I don't think there is a consensus in deciding that short-term rental are the culprit. I see the parking, trash, and noise are to me behavioral issues. And also when the construction or the expansion on the island is out of control, that's also something that, in my opinion, can be handled with code and specification on your side, on the township side. Behavioral issues are hard to address. When you have a drunk person or a loud person that creates problem, it's difficult. It takes guts to go confront those individuals, because you might end up with a bloody nose or God knows what. But it doesn't necessarily take a massive amount of increased taxes and police enforcement. It takes guts to have someone to go to confront that person and say, turn it down. Or it's more something that's difficult to do, and I get it. But it doesn't necessarily take a tremendous amount of change in tax base or constraints for the residents and for the renters. So what I'm saying is that maybe on your side, on what you can control with code and specification, what you allow, would you allow a house to be torn down and a house that's 5 times the size to be built? That's your decision. And that's our voice as well to give you an insight of whether we think it's a good idea or not. And as far as enforcement, usually, you have 5% of the people that make the most noise. If you take care of these people, the vast majority of the rest is going to quiet down. But it takes guts. It takes guts to address that. So that's my opinion. Again, thank you for doing this. I really wish that my wife, my kids, my grandkids will use the island for many, many years to come, and it might even get better in the future. Who knows? It's not, it's limited in land mass, but based on what you decide, what the population decides and wants to do, it might be a great place to be for a long time.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate that. And we certainly hope we're doing everything we can to make the island better for a long time. I appreciate that. As you may have heard, if you were on the call earlier, your comments exactly echo comments we received earlier in this call. Mr. Merkovich, I'm not quite sure how to pronounce it, said the same thing. And so I appreciate those comments and echoing, so we fully understand the idea that, some people, feel like there are existing regulations in place that should just be enforced. There shouldn't be any new regulations. I heard that and I appreciate it. I just want to note, and again, I don't think that anyone expects perfection, and I don't think anyone expects that either owners or property managers can police folks' behavior. I don't think that's necessarily the expectation. But I think there are some things that we can do to communicate those expectations, and we can look at a different variety of ways to do that and find the right one for us. Thank you for your comments. I appreciate it. Oh, Mr. Morrison? Mr. Morrison, you have your hand raised. I'm not sure if you would like to comment or not. It looks like you're currently on mute if you would like to comment. Okay. Ms. Blank?
Hi there, and thanks. And I'm impressed. You have been outstanding this whole meeting. And so I just need to say thank you because you have handled all of these concerns very well. I'm an owner in Palmetto Dunes. I've bought 2 houses in the last 3 years. One I sold in 24 hours and just bought another one because we love Hilton Head so much. Of course, I live in Kentucky right now and we rent our home because we both still work. But the goal is, like everybody else on this call, retire there at least part of the year and rent in the other parts of the year and keep our home and help pay for the expenses. I echo everything Nicholas S. just said. I can't say his last name either. I'm sorry, Nicholas. And I feel strongly that PD does a great job in the community and has pretty strict requirements. As a property owner, my frustration lies is I invest a lot of dollars in my property. I have updated it, maintained it, pay a lot of extra dollars because I don't live there full time, and have to pay a lot in taxes with the LLC and all that other mess and requirements that have been put on us. So I think the neighborhood should try to at least maintain their properties. I know that's not part of the scope, but sometimes that's frustrating when you invest so much in a property to make it aesthetically beautiful as you can. And the ARB there has a lot of strict requirements, but it's not enforced uniformly. I love Hilton Head. I want to stay here. But if you make any radical changes on what we have to do this in the future, I just ask that you give us enough time to decide if we're going to keep our property or sell it because it's too onerous as an owner. Thank you.
No, I appreciate where you're coming from. Thank you for your comments. And I have heard that people are really happy, or maybe some folks are really happy with the management in Palmetto Dunes. They feel that that's being managed well. So I've heard that comment before, and I appreciate that. And I appreciate you echoing our previous caller's comments. So we appreciate and understand how many folks feel that way. Thank you for joining. The grants, Rick and Marcia?
It's just Marcia.
Oh, just Marcia. Ms. Grant.
I was hopeful he would attend, but he does enough of this on his own. He said he doesn't need to be here. First of all, I want to say this is my 3rd meeting. I went to a public meeting that you had in person. I went to the one earlier this morning for the South Island residents, and now I'm here as a property manager. And I want to say, like Lisa, that you have done an excellent job, and I think you've handled this and answered the questions beautifully. You're not taking a side. I think you have a great future in politics. So if you ever want to transfer into something like that, you would be great at it. But as I got 2 questions. The first one's short and simple. I was under the impression, someone had told me that in your calculations as to how many rentals there are in Hilton Head Island, that in that number, you also include timeshares. Is that correct?
So the data that we have so far, and we hope to get better data very soon, was initial data that was provided by a couple different companies. A thumbnail sketch is that we've heard the comment about timeshares and that folks want to understand how many timeshares are being counted with that number, and we'll get that data for you.
Okay, because I just don't see that that's in the same scope as what we're talking about. And then the other thing I want to talk about is, and it's been brought up several times here today also, is about the property management. I had a property management company myself, and I totally respect the property managers, because the one thing I would not do is short-term rentals. I only did long-term rentals because the headaches were, it's like going from the frying pan to the fire when you get into short-term rentals. And so I understand the kind of thing that they're doing. And for a minute, when we were we rent our house and we live here part-time, not concurrently, but we're like everybody else. We plan to retire here and whatever. But for a minute, we used one of those national property management companies. And I can tell you that it did not work for us. It was every time you wanted something done, you were talking to someone in Texas, you were hearing about what the team had to discuss. You would have to make an appointment to have a online chat. And one of my favorite phrases they always used, which just burned me, was the guest experience. I'm the owner. I want the experience. I want to know what's going on with my house. So I was more hands-on, I guess, than that. But a lot of the problems that you're talking about, I think there are those kinds of property management companies that want to maximize the rental income. They'll rent for 1 or 2 nights. And it's just in and out and in and out. And like I said, that kind of a management perspective wasn't going to work for us because a lot of the damage and everything occurs with changeover. And so we have a minimum number of nights that we rent, and that's just our personal choice. And I want a person, that I can talk to, that I can communicate with about what's going on at my house. And we have that now, and I'm so very happy about it. But I think that property management companies do need to be involved in this discussion, and it needs to be noted the differences in property management companies. There are the local ones where the people live here, they live in the same neighborhoods, they have a much more vested interest than these national companies that are just doing online management. Not to say that they can't do a good job at times, but it just didn't work for us. And I think there is a difference.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I appreciate that. I appreciate what you're saying. In fact, I had heard, and I can't remember what the context was. I'd heard someone say the exact same thing that you did about the guest experience and those companies focusing on the guest experience and not considering the owner's experience or resident's experience. But that's just a side note. I did want to ask you, you mentioned that you had managed long-term rental versus short-term. How would you define short-term?
Short-term rentals, then this is in Asheville, North Carolina. They classify that as anything less than 30 days.
Sure.
Although a long-term rental, all of my long-term rentals had to be a year. You had to have a year lease with them. And so I don't know what they do about the timeframes between 30 days and a year. And we would have like traveling nurses who would come in that would be there for 6 months. So they weren't really long-term, but they weren't really short-term either. There was a range in there, and we never really had a good way of handling it. To tell you the truth, what we did is we signed a 1-year lease and then let them out of it, just because we didn't know what else to do. But yeah, 30 days was usually the classification for short-term.
We've seen a lot of that too. That's interesting. Yeah. And I appreciate your point about proper management of properties. We've heard a lot of folks who are involved. Obviously, they're involved because they're involved in these stakeholder meetings with their property. And whether they manage it themselves personally or they assign it to someone that they know or they have a property management company, they find that having that hands-on management, it really makes a difference. And again, we're not looking for perfection, but I think a lot of the issues are resolved by having good management in place.
And one other thing I'll say too is we used to have a lake house, and I did manage that rental myself. And I found that in doing so, I personally talked to all the tenants that were going to be going to the house to give them the code and everything. They knew it was my house. And once you have that personal connection, I never had the damage or the property damage or any of the problems that I sometimes found when I was dealing with, like I said, long-term, a national company. And so the same is true with property management companies. If they have a personal connection with these people, they've seen them, they talk to them, they meet them at the house or come by when they have a problem, they're much less likely to have problems with those tenants either in the neighborhood or in the house or whatever it is, because they feel now they know you and they're not going to damage something of yours.
I appreciate that comment very much. Yes, I can see where you're coming from. And I think to the extent that we can, and it's not the same thing as a personal connection, but I think in educating people about the island goes to some way down that road. welcoming them, explaining how we're a unique community, I think makes people feel a little more invested, hopefully. But I think education is going to be an important part of this.
I would agree with that.
Thank you so much for joining today, and thank you for your comments. Mr. Bafano?
Yes, Ann, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
First of all, thank you for having this meeting. You're doing an excellent job, and I really do appreciate it. I've got two questions and then a comment. In talking about short-term rentals, by the way, I'm a full-time resident here, but I was a long-time renter, so I do appreciate the fact that we have short-term rentals. That's how I got here in the first place. Are you considering timeshares, the resorts and hotels, as well as the personal property, all encompassed when you talk about short-term rentals, or do you treat those three things separately?
Can I clarify? You said timeshares, hotels. What was the third? Personal property?
Just personal property that's being rented. Somebody's got a home or a condo.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I was confused. I think that we need to drill down on that. And I appreciate you raising that point because we've heard that before from people, especially timeshares and hotels. Should that be considered a part of short-term rentals? And I think it depends on the solution that you take. Obviously, a hotel where you have staff on site is maybe different than the management of even a multifamily complex where you may have a security guard or not. Or a single family house where you wouldn't necessarily have staff on site or someone on site managing. So I think in considering the definition of it, I think the ordinance or regulations that you're putting in place are relevant for that conversation.
Okay, yeah, I would have expected that. And I know from, timeshares have their own regulations and so forth, but still you can't control the behaviors. And I wanted to echo what Nicholas said. I think he addressed a lot of my comments as well as Ms. Blake, so I won't go back over those. The second question I had is that I also live in a community, a gated community, and our HOA does not allow long-term rentals. So I don't necessarily have an immediate personal stake in the outcome of your decisions. However, as an island resident, I do, because it affects globally our experience as residents here. But not all communities have HOAs. So our HOA can decide, do we want to have short-term rentals, don't we? If we were one that did, and you had a regulation related to short-term rentals, of course, we'd have to abide by that. If we don't want to have them, then it's no concern for us. But not all communities have HOAs. And some of those communities then have to depend on the town to regulate how short-term rentals are going to be handled and to what extent and so forth. So I hope that you're getting community input from those groups and maybe giving them an option as local communities without HOAs to maybe make some decisions on their own about what they want to do and what they don't want to do and where they need your help and where they don't. My comment is this. Nicholas mentioned that, it's not always easy to confront somebody with bad behavior. And to me, what I really haven't heard a lot of is the responsibility in my mind, the accountability for what people do individually, behaviorally, is the responsibility of the person that owns the home or owns the property. If I have guests, I should be held accountable for what my guests do on my property, off my property, on the beach, wherever. And if there's a pattern of behavior that comes from a property, somebody's got a short-term rental, they rent week to week, and there's always issues and the homeowner never addresses that. As part of your regulation, you might want to consider some accountability measures to hold that homeowner, not the management company necessarily, but the homeowner responsible for what their guests are, for controlling or putting in place proper procedures to control what their guests do or to try to help educate and govern what happens there, whether that's some series of fines, graduated fines, or whatever. But I think if you don't have homeowners accountable for what their guests do, it's going to be very difficult for the town's resources to always be monitoring bad behavior, wherever it occurs. So that's my comment. So thank you for listening.
Oh, thank you very much for your input. I appreciate that. That is something we've seen in some other ordinances that communities have and that they've had to address is what do you do for property where it's repeated, there's a repeated issue. And it's because, for whatever reason, it's not being, the problems aren't being addressed. And that's something that we need to consider and incorporate into solutions as we move forward. And I appreciate your input. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Moreno, is it pronounced Moreno?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so thank you for taking my question. And I also wanted to add, I really appreciate you including us in the conversation. That is very helpful versus finding out about something later on. So just something quick. I mean, I've lived in the area for over 10 years and I own 3 properties that I rent out in the South Forest Beach area. And I also live here locally. I wanted to touch on a couple things that have been said just for feedback. One is I do believe what the last gentleman said, that it really is on the owner that's renting out the property. You've touched a lot on educating, the guests, and I really do believe that that is what makes a successful, short-term rental that's also good for the community. So I found myself that managing my own properties, what has made them successful over the years is providing a rental contract, educating the guests before they arrive on what the rules and expectations are. And I've never had someone say, I'm not going to rent your property because of rules and expectations. So you've mentioned some things about providing more educational materials about the town. And I do think it would be helpful to have some things that could be provided to, people that are renting out their homes and condos and et cetera, that we can also include with our rental contracts, our welcome packets, all of that. So just having more of a standardized set of, information. Again, everyone is going to do their own, have their own flair of how they do it. But I think even if there's just material that we can access, then that would be great. And then one other thing I just wanted to add is I know that the Department of Revenue, they do have some definitions of a short-term rental versus a long-term, of when it's taxable, when it's not, with having a contract for a long-term. So that may be something you look at as well in helping with that definition.
Thank you. I appreciate that point. There are, for different entities, use different definitions of short-term rentals. And we've certainly seen in our research the different communities definitions of short-term rentals, and bringing in that Department of Revenue definition is helpful too. And I just wanted to mention, I appreciate your comment about education, just to emphasize that it brings a positive experience to folks instead of feeling like they're being punished when they're visiting around vacation.
Right.
I think that's going to be important for us. And I really appreciate your comment about the what I'm going to call a good neighbor brochure. Other communities have called it that, and I've looked at several examples recently of those, and I think that's a really good tool for education, just to welcome and also inform folks of expectations that we have.
Yeah, and I have found, again, having done this for many years, that guests are more likely to respect a property when they actually see that there are rules and regulations versus just arriving and not really knowing what to expect. So there's nothing wrong with having a contract, or nothing wrong with providing guests, hey, these are the rules in my condo complex, and these are also the rules that I have for my short-term rental. So
sure. Thank you so much for your comments, and thanks for joining today.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Jimison?
Yeah, I think the dialogue's been essentially spot on, and I think 2 points from previous sessions and up to now, I think there's a huge difference between local rental management that lives in the community. They happen to understand my property. They take care of my property. They take care of it in case of hurricanes. They inspect it. They keep it up to date. National companies, from all the dialogue I'd read online, seems to be where there's a lot of the problems, and I would never use those. I like having that local TLC. To to the education thing, I agree. I mean, in my single property, you know, is my second home. It's all posted. There is a welcome booklet with not only all the welcoming information, but the rules, how to be a good neighbor. I often wondered through technology, and I don't know if it'll help, but it certainly couldn't hurt. But, you know, as you go to resorts like at the Kiowa Resort, you know, Grove Park, Greenbrier, turn on the TV, you immediately get a very positive, welcoming message and the expectations that are set. And, you know, that can be, I'm just wondering if we can't find the ways and means, usually that's through a closed circuit TV, and at the first outset, you know, that message is played in full before you can change the channel. I always thought that would be wonderful. I don't know if you can stream it through YouTube and have it that, you know, that kind of effect, or you need a dedicated server through the local cable companies. If there's any ways and means of doing that, I think that would be a wonderful first step in trying to promote the education, as opposed to paper that may or may not be read.
Sure. I think I appreciate that point. I think that there are folks respond to education in a number of different ways, and folks who might like paper copy may not resonate with cell phones, or, you know, folks who use cell phones exclusively may appreciate that more. And I think having a video option for folks is just another way to reach people. I think that's a great point. Thank you.
Yeah, and just the other point, you described the process, which is great. I interpret from that as you come with a recommendation, it would serve as a straw man for the community, all the stakeholders to comment on. I'm assuming there'd be enough lead time so that quote straw man or recommendation actually can afford to get some critique and comment before something's fast tracked. Would that be the case?
Of course. And if you sign up for project updates, if you take a look at it, that'll notify you of upcoming meetings. I would take a look at the agenda of upcoming meetings. The next Public Planning Committee meeting is on January 27th. That's next Thursday. It starts at 10 a.m. And all of the public meetings are being live streamed right now. They're also being recorded for future viewing, but you can watch it through the town's public meetings Facebook page. You don't need a Facebook account to watch. You can just click the link and watch the meeting. But there'll be an opportunity for public comment during the meeting and comments to the committee. You can submit comments to the committee that they'll receive before that. So yes, there'll be plenty of opportunity for folks to review any proposals moving forward and give some comments on those.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us.
Mm-hmm.
Colin?
Yeah, hey. This meeting's been run very well. Fantastic. However, I think the challenge we have here is the cart is before the horse. In fact, I don't think the horse is even awake yet. We seem to be looking for solutions and how it's going to apply, who's it's going to apply to. But I've yet to hear what the actual problem is in quantifiable means. Are we talking about one noise disturbance a year? Are we talking about 1,000 a year? It seems to me that we're proposing solutions and we're getting input to those solutions, but I don't even know we've determined that there is actually a problem.
Well, thank you for your comment, Colin. We have received a number of, the town receives a number of complaints, but we have received a number of complaints about specifically short-term rentals that have been identified by residents who live near them. And they know their neighborhoods and they know that those are short-term rentals if they didn't know by looking at the sign that notifies that it's, you know, run by this or that company. So we have received a number of complaints about short-term rental properties. I would encourage you to take a look at the survey results that are in the Open Town Hall survey. We've had, I think at the last check, it was getting close to 2,300 responses. And if you take a look, you can see people's comments. If you scroll through, it won't take you very long to find residents who have concerns about short-term rentals. So that's what we're trying to respond to, is the complaints that we've received and the feedback that we've received both in meetings, and all of these are televised and you can take a look at them, and in that Open Town Hall survey.
So in that Open Town Hall survey, I've submitted my feedback, and then I went and look at the output, and there's a statement that says you can't see it until you finished your data collection. So how can we review the results that you're referring to?
If you go to the page, if you take a look, there's a button that says feedback. You don't need to complete a survey to look at the feedback. You just click feedback and it'll show you in actually every single form that's been submitted. Now it doesn't have anyone's name on it, but it has all the forms that were submitted. There's two buttons. There's a summary, and then I think it says details. And you can look through and you can read the comments that folks left.
Sorry, I missed you. So there's the feedback tab and then there's
Yes,
the
sir.
outcome tab. So the outcome tab is what?
The outcome tab, I actually haven't explored that button yet. I've been looking at the feedback. Give me just a second.
But if you have all this data, while you're looking at that, if you have all this data, in the comments section, there's been a lot of, we're collecting data. Is there a summary of this problem data? You may have had a few complaints, but how many complaints? What type of complaints? We've been very general here. So I'm just, and then, yeah, and a similar comment is along the same vein. We're talking about an ordinance, but in the comments, somebody responded that that may only be one of the potential outcomes. So it seems to be we have a timeline for doing something. We're still collecting information, and yet we seem to have a timeline for doing something that we haven't collected the information on. So that's the end of my comment.
Okay, thank you, sir. I think I have a little bit of clarity on the outcomes. I think if you look at the outcomes tab after the survey is closed, which it closed on January 31st, that gives you an idea of the survey in its entirety. You can look through the feedback. Like I said, there's, I think we're closing in on 2,300 comments at this point to get a good sense of the concerns that folks have about short-term rentals in the island and what we're trying to approach. And I would encourage you to take a listen to some of the meetings that we've had, and these will be available on the town's YouTube page for meetings, so you can hear what folks' concerns are about short-term rentals. Thank you for your comments, and thank you for joining today. We're closing in on, I'm sorry, I'm letting the time get away from me. We are closing in on 5 o'clock, and we intended to end our webinar. I just want to give one last chance for anyone who has a quick comment, who hasn't had an opportunity to speak before. Ms. Prince? Ms. Prince, I think you might need to unmute yourself if you want to make a comment.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, ma'am.
Great, thanks so much. It's been a very informative meeting. I appreciate everybody's feedback. Just wanted to offer another perspective as someone who, as I'm sure there are many of us, I self-manage my rental and have for the last 4 years. I do not live on the island. I live about 6 hours away, but we have really had no issues whatsoever with our neighbors, with our homeowners association. We take a lot of pride in our personal contact with everybody we rent with. And I realize, everybody's situation is different, but we made a decision to do it that way because we wanted that personal touch and did not want to turn that over to a property management company. And it's worked very well for us. So I just wanted to voice that perspective and hope that that would be considered if there's any thought of requiring an on-site or on-island property manager, that would in effect be, in essence, levying a tax, an additional expense on us that we are not currently having to incur and have not encountered any issues by managing our rental that way. So just wanted to add that voice to the discussion.
Thank you, ma'am. I take your point. Actually, I received that exact comment on Tuesday at a meeting saying, there are, I own my property and I manage it and I don't need a property manager. So we heard that loud and clear, and I appreciate that perspective. I want to let folks know as we wrap up that the Q&A, that the questions and answers will be posted on the town's website, as well as a link to this video and the previous video for stakeholder meetings that we've had. There are, again, upcoming meetings for There's one on January 31st, which is a Monday from 10 to 12 for short-term rental owners again. On February 1st from 3 to 4:30 for residential property rental companies. And on February 3rd from 2:30 to 4:30, there'll be another public open house. The survey is open until January 31st. Please take that and submit your comments. And I would encourage you again to sign up for project updates. So you're looking at the upcoming meeting agendas and meeting materials for the Public Planning Committee meeting. I would encourage you to take a look at the agenda materials for our next meeting, which is January 27th. It starts at 10 a.m. and you can view it live on the town's Facebook public meetings page. You don't need a Facebook account to register. You can just click the link and view the meeting or view it afterwards if you're not able to attend in person. There's the opportunity for public comment during the meeting, and you can submit written comments before the meeting. So those are some ways to stay involved and stay informed. And I really appreciate you taking time out of your day to give us your comments. I think it's really important for us to understand everyone's perspective before we move forward. I want to thank very much the staff team that's been working on this. Renee Phillips did a fantastic job setting up all these webinars and making it easy for everyone to participate, and I really appreciate that. Terry Lewis, Nicole Dixon, and Jamie Lobko, and Teresa Haley have been working in the background here with me to make this a great experience for you, and I hope it was. I want to thank our town council members who are able to join us today. Mr. Brown, Ms. Becker, Mr. Lennox, and Mr. Ames, who heard what you had to say, and will use that information moving forward. Thank you for joining us. And I want to mention that there will be a poll at the end of this webinar, and please give us your feedbacks so we can find ways to improve in the future. Okay, before we wrap up, just one last comment from Mr. Warren. Ken, do you want to give us a last comment? You'd have to unmute yourself if you want to comment, Mr. Warren. I think you're muted on your end. Okay, Mr. Warren, if you want to make a comment, please let me know and we'll make sure that we include your feedback. Thank you, everyone, and I hope you have a great evening.